Hello. I think we are live. Are we live?
There
There might be a delay.
This is like Grandpa's trying to do technology.
I show we're live. One person viewing.
Could be you.
Two people.
I just figured there's a delay.
Yeah, but it's not that long. It's like a couple seconds. If anything.
He sees you, Brandon says.
All right. We are live. Technical difficulties. Google security can be a bitch, apparently. Anyways, we're live. This is the first time we've ever done this, so we apologize for being a little late. It's been a while, a couple weeks. Corona is some bullshit, but we don't want to talk about that tonight. Tonight we want to talk about intellectual property because I'm sick of talking about Corona. So I hope everyone out there is doing good. I hope you're not getting harassed by the police. I hope you got tons of supplies, tons of TP. Keep your butt safe. Luckily for us, Grandpa didn't get caught by the Corona, so he's here tonight to tell us all about intellectual property. So we're going to do a couple quick announcements. Obviously, Scott Horton is not happening this Friday, sadly. Scott is quarantined in Texas, but we talked with him. We might be doing a live event later in the year. He said he's down to come out, so we're hoping that we can still do that. We're still going to be selling his books, Fool's Errand and The Great Ron Paul. We're going to be doing both of those to try and raise money to bring Scott out here. And then we might do a virtual event with Scott. We don't know. Scott's on board. We might be doing that in the next couple weeks. We have no idea what our schedule is. Basically, we don't want to put any schedules out there because who knows what's happening out there in the world. So also want to mention Choppers is still open. If you guys want to go out and support Choppers, they're doing takeout. You can go support Choppers. Hopefully they're still open when we are back to live events. Whatever that is, we don't know. So I think that's about it. We're going to get started. Your favorite Liberty Grandpa is here. 10 years, he's finally given a talk. Justin Longo is now here to talk about intellectual property and regular property. So give up a virtual high five for Justin Longo.
Wow, this is interesting. All right, so hey everybody, I was the host of this happy hour drinking club for many years, and I always wanted to just be the MC and let everyone do talks. I never did a talk, so now that I'm not the MC, I'm gonna do my first talk. And so Kira and Josh have been asking me to do a talk on property rights for eons, and so here is your talk on property rights, which will lead us into intellectual property and why it's a bunch of baloney. All right, so beer. Cheers, everybody. Cheers. I'm going to be distilling this talk into two main parts. The first part is going to be a discussion on property rights. What are they? Why are they useful enough to emerge in civil society? And what is the Austrian libertarian conception of property rights? And that will lead us into the second part of the talk, which we will build off of our understanding of property rights and then get into the discussion on why intellectual property makes no sense and is actually extremely harmful. All right, before I continue any further, I have to give props where props are due. A lot of this material I am going to go through will be from the great Stephan Kinsella, author of Against Intellectual Property. Stephan Kinsella has been the expert, the foremost leader on intellectual property issues for probably 20-25 years. And of course, Stephan Kinsella's mentor, Hans Hermann Hoppe, who has been a part of the Austrian circles and the Mises Institute for decades and decades. And one of Hans Hermann Hoppe's areas of expertise is property rights, so a lot of my property rights stuff comes from him. So if I mention Kinsella or I mention Hoppe, you know who I'm talking about. The two greats that have really dug into these issues. So first we need to recognize that every political philosophy, every sort of political arrangement in modern civil society all have property rights. They all have arrangements where people recognize who owns what. So I'm making this distinction of modern civil society under some political philosophy versus pre-modern society of barbarism, of the Hobbesian all versus all, of might makes right. So my argument would be pre-modern civil society of property rights, there existed mere possession. So in barbaric times and pre-modern times, you had, if you were in possession of a certain object and somebody who was stronger or bigger than you came along, they could take the object from you and now they possess it. And if somebody were to come along who was bigger and stronger than them, they could take it from them and now they possess it. And so pre-modern conceptions, pre-modern existence was mere possession and not actual property rights. I would say that every political philosophy, every political arrangement in modern civil society has some version of property rights where people recognize and understand who owns what. So let's see some examples. Number one, first example would be monarchies, the political system of monarchism, where it is understood by the people under the king or the queen that the monarch owns everything and we all live at the behest of the monarch. Another example would be something like communism or socialism, where it is commonly understood by the people that the owner of the things is the state, right? The people all recognize that the ownership belongs in the state. And all the way up to modern current times where we have a democracies and a democratic republic under a constitution where the people commonly recognize and understand that the state owns everything. So if you don't agree with that, then I would refer you to the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The Fifth Amendment of the Bill of Rights enshrines eminent domain, and I would refer you to the Supreme Court decision of Kelo versus New London. The state does, in fact, actually own everything. But that's an aside. All right, let's get into some definitions and some terms. What do we mean when we use the term property rights? What have I been referring to? So far I've been saying something like people's recognition of who owns what. Stephen Kinsella's definition of property rights is the exclusive right to control a scarce resource. So property rights are those rights that confer a direct and immediate authority over a thing. So ownership may be thought of as the right to possess, but not mere possession. Again, taking something from someone and possessing it doesn't mean you actually own it. So there's a reason why I keep mentioning recognition or understanding of property rights, who owns what. It's because property rights don't emerge in solitude, just like they don't emerge in pre-civilization of might makes right. So if you're living alone on an island, property rights wouldn't suddenly emerge because they would have no use. There'd be no reason for them. They're not useful. Let me give you an example. If you're like me and you've lived in a house full of people because you were a broke-ass college kid at some point in your life and you've had a bunch of roommates living in a house, there's a certain thing that emerges in the refrigerator. So also, by the same token, if you've ever worked in an office with a bunch of coworkers and you've shared a break room and you've had a refrigerator in the break room, there's something that emerges in that shared refrigerator in the break room. This does not emerge when you're living alone in a house. So what am I referring to? Obviously, I'm referring to people labeling their food items in this fridge. Now, there's no reason to label your food when you live alone, just like there is a reason to label your food when you're living with a bunch of roommates. This is a visible, this is mine, Karen, put down the damn Jell-O that you keep taking from me. This is supposed to reduce conflict, and we will get into that. Another situation in which property rights would not emerge is a Garden of Eden utopia, where there is a superabundance, an infinite amount of all goods and services. You can just imagine something and it comes into existence. I don't believe that property rights would emerge in that situation either. So why do property rights emerge in civil society? Now, I've been teasing this answer for a couple of minutes, but I'll give it to you now. Property rights emerge in civil society because we live in a world of scarcity and we live in a world with other human beings. There exists external objects that when we control them, we prevent others from controlling them. All right? We live in a world of scarcity. This is a reality. There's not an infinite amount of superabundance to go around. And when we control certain external objects, we limit the ability for others to control that thing. So there's an economic term for this, and that is rivalrousness. A good is rivalrous if it is prone to rivalry. So your use of an object prevents or diminishes the use by someone else. And if we want to live in a peaceful, cooperative, prosperous society, we must assign owners to all these scarce resources in order to reduce rivalry and conflict. So here, this is a rivalrous object. So then the next logical question is, what is not rivalrous? So rivalrousness is contrasted with things that are not rivalrous. And what is not rivalrous? I would say all intangible assets, things like thoughts, ideas, knowledge, expressions, data, things that two people can possess at once without any conflict. Let me give you 2 examples. All right, first example. You fancy yourself the best baker in Colorado, right? And your friend, Sharon, also thinks that she is the best baker in Colorado, and you both decide to have a chocolate cake bake-off. So you go into your kitchen, and you both set up your little areas to bake, and here the ingredients are rivalrous, where you both can't use the same butter at the same time, you both can't use the same bowls at the same time. But the recipe from which you're working is non-rivalrous. You both can work off of the same recipe. So ingredients rivalrous, recipe not rivalrous. The recipe is simply an idea or knowledge. So here's another example of rivalrousness versus not rivalrousness. Let's assume you're at the grocery store and you're just waiting in line at the grocery store, and you look behind you and you notice it's Bernie Sanders. You're like, whoa. I never thought this was going to happen. I cannot let this opportunity pass me by. So you're like, I'm going to tell Bernie Sanders that grocery stores are better than bread lines. And so you turn around and you say, hey, Bernie, grocery stores are better than bread lines. And just as you say that, you notice Bernie's reaching for your wallet. So you slap his hand away. All right? The knowledge or the idea that grocery stores are better than bread lines is non-rivalrous. You can both have that at the same time, and it doesn't infringe on each other. However, your wallet is rivalrous. So he can't own your wallet at the same time that you are owning your wallet. So that's why you slap his hand away. Bad Bernie. All right. So the next question is, what is libertarian property rights theory? How do we come to justly own these rivalrous external objects in the world? Well, there are 2 ways that you can own external rivalrous objects. The first way is the most common way and the most uncontroversial way. No one would really have a problem with this. The first way you can own things is a title transfer. And what that means is somebody already owns something, they have the title to it, and they either gift it to you through charity, and that would be called a unilateral transfer, or somebody owns something and then they decide to sell it to you in exchange for money, or they trade it to you, they barter it with you. So that's a bilateral title transfer. So that's very uncontroversial. That does not separate libertarianism from anything else. The second way that you come to own things is really what separates libertarians. So the next question, obvious question, is, well, how do you come to own previously unowned or abandoned rivalrous objects in the external world? So this is where libertarians separate ourselves. We believe in the first user principle. And some people would refer to this first user principle as something like homesteading, or they would invoke John Locke. The first user principle simply states that if an actor is going out into the world and they come upon an unowned or an abandoned scarce resource, they can interfere with that unowned resource and claim ownership of it, with sort of like you're making an intention like to the world, this is mine, right? So that this could be like you're in the middle of nowhere in a forest and you see some unowned abandoned land, let's say that hasn't been abandoned and it hasn't been occupied in 100 years, and so you emborder the land and you make it visible that this is mine. Or you come across, you're in the middle of a forest, in the middle of nowhere, and you come across a tree that is clearly unowned, so you chop it down and now you say, I own this wood. All right, so this first user principle is the bedrock of the libertarian conception of how you can come to justly acquire and own things, right? And so Hans Hermann Hoppe goes very much into this principle, and he makes the prior-later distinction, So the first user, before we get into that, the question we're asking always in terms of property rights is, who has the best claim to this scarce resource? That's really the question we're asking. Who has the best claim? And so the libertarian answer is the first user, or the person who has justly acquired it through title transfer. That's the answer. That's the person with the best claim. So if you were to try to contradict the first user principle and say, no, it's a latecomer. It's somebody that was the second, third, fourth, fifth, 110th there. They have a better claim than the first person. Well, now we're back into a state of all against all. We're back into a state of mere possession. Because if it's not the first person, the first user that has the best claim, and it's some other latecomer that has the best claim, well, where does that logically end? There's no logical end point to that. If it's the second person, well, why not the third? If it's the third person, why not the fourth? There's no logical end to it. So there's a logic in this, and to sort of back up this logic, I realized doing this research that this first user principle is a lot like Ludwig von Mises's first irrefutable self-evident axiom of man acts. So Mises's whole economic theory, his whole dive into the logic of human action, all begins with the foundational principle of man acts. And if you try to refute that man acts, you are acting. So you're asserting that principle. So the same sort of situation that happens with property rights, where if you try to stop someone from claiming or asserting a property right over an unowned resource, there are two ways you can do that. One, you could use force against that person to stop them, in which case you'd have to make a case of why you're allowed or justified in using force against someone who is not using force against anyone else. Maybe they're just embordering an unowned piece of land. And the other way you could stop them is by saying, no, stop, I have control over that. But if you have control over that, you're exerting a property right over that. So in order to refute property rights, you have to exert property rights. So it's sort of a contradiction in a self-refuting, irrefutable axiom. All right, all of this is to say, we're going to get to the three confusions of property rights that libertarians tend to make. Objectivists certainly make these three confusions, and these confusions are what leads people to believe in the morality or the justification of intellectual property. The first confusion is creation. You own what you create. The second confusion, these are all kind of like derivatives of one another. The first is creation, I own what I create. The second is production, I own what I produce. And the third thing is I own what I've labored over. I've labored for so many hours, so therefore I own it. None of these three things are sufficient, or none of these three things are a source of ownership. For example, let's say that you want to build a shed in your backyard, and you notice that your neighbor has a stockpile of wood in his backyard. So you go over to your neighbor's house, grab all the wood, bring it to your backyard, and then you create and labor and produce this beautiful shed. Do you own the shed? No. Let's say you want to sculpt something. So you see this office building has a piece of marble, and so you take the marble and then you labor and you create and you produce this beautiful sculpture. You don't own the sculpture. So the TLDR of this whole thing is, if you own the inputs, you have to justly acquire the inputs, then you own the outputs. Creation is simply just transforming what you already own into something else. You don't need all this mystical, I created value, so therefore I own it. That's all mysticism. That's all confusion. That's what leads people down this path of intellectual property. All right, we're moving along, boys and girls. All right, so let me wrap up this first section, and then we'll get into intellectual property and why it's fallacious. We're going to end with the most nerdy thing of all, the Misesian framework. Why does this matter? Why are we even talking about this? Who cares about property rights? It doesn't matter. Well, here's why it matters. If you care about living in a prosperous, peaceful, cooperative society where we can reduce conflicts, then you have to care about the source of property rights. You have to care about humans acting. So Mises' first irrefutable foundational bedrock principle is man acts. Why is this important? Well, why does man act? Why do we study the logic of human action? The reason is man acts in order to alleviate uneasiness, in the words of Mises. Man acts in order to achieve a better end. How does man do this? Man or woman, person, do this? Well, they use two things, which Mises called the pillars of human action. They use knowledge, science, he's sometimes called knowledge science, and they use property, scarce resources. So science, knowledge, and property are the twin pillars of human action. Man uses knowledge, his understanding of cause and effect, causal laws in the universe, in the world around him, and he employs scarce means that he owns in order to achieve a better end state. So the stupid, silly example is you're sitting on a couch, you're not doing anything, and suddenly you become hungry. So you use your knowledge of cause and effect, your knowledge of how to make a sandwich, and you use your scarce means of the bread, the cheese, and the ham to alleviate that uneasiness. So there, the Misesian framework for you all. Property rights and the assignment of owners in scarce, rivalrous resources allows man to act without conflict. And this action leads to wealth production. It leads to higher standards of living. It leads to, even just being able to live for any period of time. All right. Now let's get into intellectual property. Hey, all right. So the first book I want to mention is Stephen Kitsella's Against Intellectual Property, which is a more or less, I would say it's a ethical or moral look at intellectual property, and we'll get into both cases. So this book, this very short pamphlet, covers the moral case against it. This longer diatribe, this one's called Against Intellectual Monopoly, which is very aptly titled, because that's what intellectual property laws are, government-granted monopolies. This book is a historical, utilitarian analysis of whether IP laws ever help innovation, or if in fact they retard innovation. So this thick book goes into pretty much every industry throughout history, every math, science, technology, agriculture, music, creative writing, what have you. It goes into all of these specific subsets and says, well, let's look at what IP did in these areas. Did it spur innovation? Did it spur growth? And the resounding answer is no. All right. So Against Intellectual Monopoly by Kelly Boldrin and David Levine. So a lot of this stuff comes from that. All right. Another bit of housekeeping before we get into the intellectual property part of it. I'm not going to get into the subsets, the less talked about, the less popular versions of intellectual property, like trademarks, trade secrets, reputation rights, boat hold designs. There's a whole slew of these subsets where really when people are discussing and arguing over intellectual property, they're really talking about two things. They're talking about patent and they're talking about copyright. So let's tackle those things. Let's get a definition. Let's discuss what we're talking about when we say patent. What is a patent? A patent gives a person a monopoly over a useful invention for 20 years. The inventor must apply for the patent at the patent office, a government bureaucracy, and if granted, the patent allows the inventor to use the legal system to enforce their monopoly over their invention, which their invention could be machines, processes, designs, methods, composition of matter. Composition of matter would be like pharmaceutical or Monsanto's patents, etc. This grant of a patent allows the patentee, the inventor, to have a monopoly over this idea or this process for 20 years. And the legal system does not recognize independent creation or simultaneous discovery. That is no defense against someone exercising a patent on you, against you. And the patent holder can sue and get money damages, or they can the courts will issue an injunction and shut you down. So I want to be really specific about what a patent does. A patent gives the inventor the right to exclude others from making, using, offering for sale, or selling the invention. The patent is what is granted is not the right to make, use, or to sell this thing. It's the legal enforcement to exclude others. It's a government granted monopoly over this thing for 20 years. All right, what is a copyright? Copyright covers works of original expression, paintings, writings, computer code, music, poems, photography, etc. Copyright, on the other hand, is automatic. You don't file for it, and you can't get rid of it. So unlike a patent where you have to file for it and you get it granted, a copyright is automatic. You can't deny the copyright. You just have one. So my notes that my outline that I wrote for this talk, that's already copywritten. I have no choice. I don't think many people know that. So the copyright gives the author an exclusive right to reproduce the work, prepare derivative works, or to perform or present the work publicly. So for example, you cannot write a derivative work titled Harry Potter Learns the Nap, or you can't write a derivative work titled Frodo Does Dallas, and you can't perform Thriller in your front yard for the public. Yeah. So again, what we're talking about is a government granted monopoly that is enforced against the world. This is not taking a class and plagiarizing a paper and getting in trouble. This is not a peer-to-peer contract. For example, this is not me writing a book and I write in the book, upon condition of the sale of this book, you may not reproduce this, buyer. That's not what intellectual property is. You go to the government, you get this granted monopoly, and that monopoly is against the world. And so in legal terms, this is en rem. En persona means a contract between two persons. En rem means a contract against the world. So physical property, like if you buy property, that's en rem, that's property right against the world. Just like a patent is the right to have a monopoly over an idea that is against the world. That's what we're talking about. So a little bit of history to show you where this all came from. Man, it's hot over here. No, I don't want to take it off for the people. Take it off for the people. A little history. The first example of patents that I was able to come up with is from 500 BC. There was a town held a cooking competition, and whoever won the competition won a monopoly privilege over that dish for the year. All right, so the history of patents it has been mostly up until the 1700s. The history of patents and the history of granting monopolies was monarchical political favoritism. So from in the UK during the times of kings and queens like Queen Anne and King James would pick political favorites, or they would give monopoly privileges to the guilds, and they would say, you have a patent in selling salt, you have a patent in starch, you have a patent in producing playing cards. And so the people were obviously very upset by the king and the queen granting monopolies over common items. So this is where our patents come from. And believe it or not, the Statute of Monopolies of 1624, this is the OG enshrined patent law. Statute of Monopolies of 1624 was actually when Parliament took the power from the kings and queens and they got rid of all of the ridiculous patents on salt and starch and cotton and all these common items that were not novel inventions. And they said, you know what? All these monopolies on all of these things are ridiculous. Everyone's mad about this stuff. This was just political favoritism. It was cronyism. It was raising revenue. We're only going to leave one, and that is a patent on novel inventions. So they went pretty far, but they didn't go far enough. They left one in there, unfortunately, for our stupid Constitution. What was the OG copyright law? Well, that was the Statute of Anne of 1710, or also known as the Copyright Act of 1710. This was also an improvement upon the previous Licensing of the Press Act of 1662, which gave a publishing monopoly to printers' guilds, who would then use the power to censor. So the history of copyright, as you might imagine, is a history of censorship, just like it is. Just like it could be used today. So it's easy to take the stance of, well, you know, copyright and patent are good in theory, but the modern age has really bastardized them and they go too far. You know, I can sit here and give you an innumerable amount of examples of ridiculous patents that you would not even believe exist, but they are very true. Just for example, going about your daily life, you are breaching intellectual property laws all day long. Did you reply to an email with a previous email in the reply space? Well, that's copyright infringement. Are you a Ford truck fan and you share pictures of your Ford truck with friends online? Well, that's patent infringement. Ford actually shut down a Ford truck enthusiast page for sharing photos of their own truck because they have the patent on the design. So I can sit here and give you ridiculous examples. Oh, here's another one. 20% of the human genome has been patented. Who owns you? Owners of certain genes have sent cease and desist letters to scientists working with genes on cures for cancer, for example. So I can give you all the fringe cases, but that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to break this down and strike the root. My argument is, here's the bottom line. This is the TLDR of the entire thing against intellectual property. Bottom line is, assigning a property right in an idea or anything non-rivalrous necessarily conflicts with, redistributes, and denies real property rights. I'll say that again. Assigning a property right in an idea or anything else non-rivalrous necessarily conflicts with, redistributes, and denies real property rights. So I think the entire thing should be abolished. It's all nonsense. All right. You have to understand that intellectual monopoly is a veto right. And so in legalese, this would be called a negative servitude on everyone else's property. So the law says you may not do that with your own property. So for example, if you wrote a song, I heard the song, I memorized it, and then I played the song publicly, now I'm not allowed to do that. The law says you cannot use your guitar, your fingers, your vocal cords the way that you want. You can't use your guitar and your body the way that you see fit. Let's say you invented and got a patent on hanging balls on the back of a truck, right? You have this patent. And I have a truck and I see this and I'm like, man, I want some hanging balls on the back of my truck. So I go to Home Depot and I buy all the ingredients and all the materials to make my own pair of hanging balls, and I proudly hang them on the back of my truck. Well, that's a patent infringement. I'm not allowed to do that. But wait, hold on. I use my money to purchase my materials that I justly acquired. That was a title transfer. And now you're saying that I can't put my hanging balls on my truck? That's absurd. So this is why intellectual property is not, it's a misnomer. It's not actual property. Assigning a property right in an ethereal, infinitely copyable thing, a thing that we can all have at the same time without harming anyone else, actually harms people's real property. Okay, if you think about it, so the reason, why should a libertarian be against this? That's a good question. Glad you asked. The decree of a monopoly against the world, which is what this patent system is another version of the latecomer ethic. For example, if you come up with a new, more efficient way to dig a well, and patent the process, you can then stop me from digging a well on my own property because I've violated your patent, right? So since when did you, the latecomer to my property, I've justly acquired it, I can produce the title, this is my property, no one, it's not in dispute. When did you, a latecomer, suddenly have ownership over my backyard and my welling material? So, in other words, merely innovating does not grant the innovator a property right in everyone else's stuff. An inventor doesn't become a worldwide partial owner of everything because they're an inventor. This is antithetical to where property rights come from. This is antithetical. This is creating conflict. This is antithetical to the whole point of why these things emerged. And so it's strange libertarians of any people at all, it's strange that libertarians would succumb to this confusion, because if you think about it, what is the argument we make all of the time regarding drug laws, conscription, minimum wage laws, business regulations, gambling laws? You say, you have no right, you have no ownership over my body, you have no ownership over my business, you can't tell me what to do with my body, you can't tell me what to do with my business. Yet, intellectual property you can? It doesn't make any sense. All right. Another point is, people who support intellectual property laws implicitly agree that it's not real property because they support intellectual property laws for a limited number of years. It's not like you suddenly stop owning your house or your bicycle after 20 years, right? It's a good thing, it's, you know, and it's a good thing that IP supporters recognize that it's not actual real property rights, and they say, okay, we'll just do it for a limited period of time. Because if they didn't, imagine what we would have to do. We'd have to find the heirs of Nikola Tesla in order to use electricity. We'd have to who are the heirs of Grunt so that we could put wheels on our bicycle? And by the way, who invented bicycles so we can get a licensing fee to give to the heirs of the person that invented the bicycle? The world would come to a grinding halt if you had an infinite amount. If IP was treated like real property, no one would be able to do anything. It's a godsend that it's only 20 years for patents, and copyright is 70 years past the death of the author, which is a really long time, but thank God it's not like infinite. Okay, so again, like, you can agree that the moral case for intellectual property makes no sense. You can agree that, okay, I don't believe in the latecomer ethic. I don't believe an inventor gets to just come up with an idea and now they have a property right in everyone else's property. I think you can think that that's silly. But then everyone always falls back on, but what about the innovation? Won't we lose all the innovation? How will people make any money? So again, against intellectual monopoly, it's a historical examination of the cause and effect, the costs of this monopoly system. And it's very clear, and Kinsella says this all the time, the authors in this book say this all the time. If you can show me one study ever in the history of studies that shows that intellectual property enhances growth or helps innovation, you would find the only one. You'd have the only one, because the preponderance of evidence, meaning all of it ever, is on the side of either neutral effect or negative effect. It retards growth, it slows innovation. So one of these objections would be, without IP, without giving inventors a monopoly, how will the inventors make money, right? Or so how, if we don't grant musicians or writers a copyright, how will they make money? And so I think this is backwards. I think this is an entrepreneurial question. This isn't a moral or a economic question. So every business has costs of exclusion. Think of a movie theater. You don't just have a movie theater and you leave it wide open for anyone to come in and look at the movie. You have the cost of exclusion is you put a young pimply-faced teen at the ticket counter and you make them take tickets to show that people have bought the ticket and then they can go in. Every business has costs of exclusion. Every business has an idea and then they have an entrepreneurial question that they have to answer. How do I make money? This is not a question of ethics. This is an entrepreneurial question. This is part of doing business. You don't get to just come up with an idea and then sit back and make money. All right. The other thing, and I've already touched on it, and I'll go more into this because there's a really good quote in this book. We wouldn't have innovation without giving inventors a monopoly. What about all the innovation we lose? Well, that's actually backwards. And according to the research, and I don't believe this is in dispute at all, patent protection is not the source of innovation, but rather the unwelcome consequence that tames innovation. In other words, IP only comes after innovations in an industry have matured. Let me give you a good quote. Here's this quote from this book. Again, this is the utilitarian case against it. You know, if you're worried about the utilitarian effects, or we won't have this or that, this is what you need to look at. Against an intellectual monopoly, Boldrin and Levine. This is a quote from this book. I'm copying it. Quote, the following sequence has never taken place in the United States or anywhere else in the world. The legislature passes a bill saying patent protection is extended to inventions in arena X, where X was yet an undeveloped area of activity. A few months, years, or decades after the bill was passed, inventions surged in arena X, which quickly turned into an innovative and booming industry. In fact, it's exactly opposite. IP laws always happen after an industry has grown up and matured, when companies are looking to maintain profits and keep new competitors out. In other words, as an industry grows more powerful and opportunities for further innovation diminish, the value of monopoly protection for the insiders increases and lobbying efforts multiply. So like I said, pretty much every industry you can imagine has been scaled back and the growth has been slowed because of monopolies. So if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. If somebody, the book comes up with a million examples. The very first 4 pages are all about the steam engine. So somebody came up with the idea of the steam engine. Oh, we'll do this thing, whatever steam engines do. And then somebody was like, wait a minute, I can improve upon that design. But the original steam engine designer got a patent on that design. And so it stopped anyone from making the invention better for a number of years. And so they go into the drop off and the decline during the years of the patent where nothing really happens. The steam engine doesn't get any better, the productive output doesn't get any better, but as soon as the patent ends, boom, innovation skyrockets, you get the Industrial Revolution. So you take like any object and you get this patent, slow growth, retarded growth, and then the patent goes away and then boom, innovation takes off, creativity blossoms, and the world gets more productive and more wealthy. All right, so let me give you a couple of quotes. Bastiat was way ahead of his time. Bastiat said, all innovation goes through 3 steps. Number 1, a firm possesses unique knowledge and profits from it. Number 2, others imitate and share in the profits. And number 3, the knowledge is so widely shared and so widespread that it's no longer profitable on its own. So what IP does is keep things in that first stage. A firm possesses unique knowledge and profits from it. We want the innovation to keep going through the other stage. We want the knowledge to be proliferated, people to learn from the knowledge, people to improve upon the knowledge, people to spread the knowledge so that we can all be wealthy. Here's another quote. Bill Gates, a man who has probably made a few dollars off of IP laws, he said, if people had understood how patents would be granted when most of today's ideas were invented and patented, the industry would be at a complete standstill. So software patents started in the very beginning in 1981, and then by 1994, software code was completely patented. So imagine where we would be if we hadn't had that. Here's a cool quote from Thomas Jefferson. A man has a right to use his knife to cut his meat, a fork to hold it. May a patentee take from him the right to combine their use on the same subject? So even Thomas Jefferson was a little skeptical of it. All right, and finally, I think Kinsella believes, he's done some calculations on the hard numbers. Kinsella believes that intellectual property laws waste about $30 to $50 billion a year in the United States alone. So if you think about it, like think of all the opportunity costs of firms entrenching themselves, trying to protect their monopoly, enforcing their monopoly, getting the monopoly, defending the monopoly, all the lawyers and all the courts, all those resources that went towards protection and anti-competitive measures rather than innovating and coming up with the next cool thing, right? Was it Amazon? Amazon has patented the one-click buy. They patented the one-click purchase button thing, and then they stopped somebody else from trying to use, like, no one else can have this one. You can't purchase anything with one click. You know, it's so silly. All right, fine. Let me just summarize it. Let me summarize this all. In conclusion, intellectual property is not property and should not be treated as such. Doing so infringes on everyone else's real property rights. We are not in favor of a latecomer ethic where third parties get to control your property and your body. And the utilitarian case is utterly unfounded in any data. And I would say if somebody is making the case that they have a system where an inventor gets to own everyone else's property, or some musician gets to own everyone else's property, and they get to be this third party totalitarian property owner, well, the burden of proof should be on them to prove that their system is founded, that the benefits outweigh the costs. And again, I would urge you to try to find anything ever in history to show that this is actually the case. All of the historical evidence is against you. There's nothing that says that this spurs innovation. Zero, zilch. So if all of the evidence is against it, you don't deserve to have a property right in everyone else's stuff, in everyone else's body. As libertarians, we should be against that. So I'd love to hear questions.
All right, I've got a few. Oh yeah, wait, hold on. I got something to you.
Yeah.
I've got a few questions to that, but also. So this question, and it's going to be in two parts, comes from JD.
JD, my main Frenchman.
Would you support patenting socialism so nobody could use it?
Would you support patenting socialism? Well, it depends on who you want to give the monopoly of socialism to, right? Because you're just granting a monopoly of socialism, so probably not. But yeah, that's a good question. That's funny.
And the second part, would you support patenting capitalism so no socialist could prevent it?
I wouldn't mind having it for 20 years, because then I would just abolish it. But yeah, you can't really. You can.
Who would enforce it?
Yeah, who would be granted the patent on capitalism? I don't know.
Okay, another question. This is coming from Claire. Can you talk a little bit about things like prescription drugs? There's so many millions of dollars that have gone into research and discovery to come up with those types of medications.
Yeah. I would refer you to the last chapter of this. So this is really short, and I'm not an expert on the pharmaceuticals, but essentially, my take on the whole pharmaceutical discussion is, because there is an FDA that has such a high bar for research and development and efficacy of new drugs, that the government intervention and the government department of the FDA that approves drugs creates such a barrier of entry that in order to recoup the cost of getting past the FDA and coming up with these drugs, that IP is sort of like an intervention to alleviate the previous intervention of the high standards of the FDA. But yeah, I think, again, I would refer back to to have a business and to make money is an entrepreneurial question. There's no such thing as a right to profit, right? As libertarians, we don't believe in positive rights. We certainly don't believe in right to profit. So part of the R&D of a pharmaceutical company is, how do we make money once this drug is out on the market? And so there's always the first mover advantage. There's always things like brand loyalty. So for example, if you've ever bought Tylenol instead of acetaminophen or acetaminophen, yeah, or if you've ever bought Advil instead of the generic knockoff, why would you ever do that? If you ever take a poll of people like, hey, who here buys Advil? And then you get a bunch of hands. Well, who here buys the knockoff? You get fewer hands. like, why are we buying Advil rather than the generic knockoff? There's first mover, there's brand loyalty, and I think that pharmaceuticals are no different. So I would say, A, government intervention has already created this process to be more costly than it ought to be, and so these companies want monopoly protection to recoup the costs because the costs are artificially too high because of the FDA and government regulations. And B, there's a first mover advantage and there's brand loyalty. So part of your job as a company is to create brand loyalty. You need to have good marketing. You need to say, well, buy Advil instead of the generic stuff, buy Tylenol instead of the generic stuff. And then you're the first to market. So people like the original, like people trust the original. So I think that's where we're at.
So I'm gonna just kind of follow up on that question in particular because Claire kind of added a further comment on it, and that is saying just that they invest significant R&D. And so to just re-summarize what you said back to you, essentially the investment that companies are making into research and development would not occur in a marketplace that didn't have some state monopolies as far as like the FDA and other like testing protocols. Is that right? So you're saying that it's unfair to say that intellectual property needs to exist for drug companies because they invest so much R&D, because that investment in R&D is not actually a necessity in the marketplace. Is that right?
there's these trials and these FDA regulations that make it a much more costly than it would if there was like Consumer Reports doing the trials,
Okay.
or like the underwriter's laboratory of pharmaceuticals. Again, like Claire, I'll give you my copy of this book, and the last chapter is all about pharmaceuticals, and they go into it. I was trying to get all of the other cases. I kind of glanced over the pharmaceuticals, but they have this entire chapter because that is a good question, and it's probably the one that has the heaviest R&D lift for it. But again, like first mover is a big thing. People love originals. People like brands. People are brand loyal, I think, and just like the goodwill that if you cured whatever disease, your brand loyalty would go through the roof. I think people are very cognizant of that.
Okay, Dave wants to know how long are book and movie copyrights valid for?
Copyright is valid 70 years after the death of the author.
And why is it so much longer than some other forms?
Sonny fucking Bono. Sonny Bono hit a tree and died. He was like Disney and Sonny Bono, I think, are the main culprits of copyright being extended for so long. Disney does not want Mickey Mouse and Mickey Mouse's cohorts to be up for grabs in the common domain, in the public domain, so they keep extending copyright to cover Disney. And I think Sonny Bono was the last person when he was in the legislature that increased copyright significantly.
So is it the same for movies and books? Because books are the author. Who would movies be? The director or scriptwriter?
Yeah, I guess like whoever is accredited with the authorship, it's whoever expressed the work in this. Yeah, maybe the director, the producer, whoever owns the script, I assume.
Yeah.
But it's not a patent. Copyright is works of original expression.
Got it.
So patent does cover sort of the closest thing patent covers to that would be like a design or a business practice. You can say like, oh, I came up with this business practice, so I'm going to patent it.
Like I have another question here from a Michael Mogren.
Ah, what up?
And the question is, what is the intellectual property of alcohol?
Tequila. That is the IP of alcohol. It's the last thing that anyone can get over.
Okay, and I've got another.
I credit the devil for that. I gotta give the devil credit for that.
Okay, I've got another question. This is from another Mogren, a Mark Mogren.
Oh,
actually.
the younger.
What if I'm poor and I invent something? A large company with more money makes the exact same product for cheaper and is more accessible. Is it okay for them to eliminate every small innovator like me?
I think you can make the same argument with that's like an anti-competitive argument. So you could say like, if I'm a small, in general, like what sort of advantage do small startups have, right? That's what you're asking. If I'm a small startup, what advantage do I have over the big guys? Because they can just mass produce something. Well, there's a lot of advantage to being a small, nimble startup. Think of all of the companies that started small and then eventually became big. They become big because whatever nimble, creative thing they did when they were small, eventually the market rewarded that sort of nimble thing. So it's funny you mention that, because one of the arguments against capitalism is that small little innovators come up with the ideas, and then all they want to do is, markets always monopolize because the big guys always just swallow up the small guys. So like you could say a good business practice would be to come up with some sort of idea in order to get bought out. That'd be a good way to make money. So your job as a business is to come up with the idea, come up with a business plan on how you're going to make money, and then come up with a way to exclude others. Come up with a way to keep that secret. So I don't understand why you would need the government's protection to keep something secret, or the government's grant of monopoly in order to earn a profit. Those are business practices that an entrepreneur needs to make in order to have a successful business. And the argument that the big will always eat the weak, well, that's an argument against all the startups we've seen that have taken off and have gotten big. So every big company eventually was once small. So I don't think there's any disadvantage to being small. In fact, there's probably quite a few enormous advantages to being small. You don't have the bureaucracy. You're not having to dictate a bunch of people like, Jen, stay in your office and another freaking meeting, and you're in your garage tinkering, and that's how most companies start, right?
Okay, I got a question.
What?
What's a job question?
Let's assume we live in a world where intellectual property doesn't exist. In that world, you're an inventor. You spent 10 years working on a super complex technology that's going to change the world. Now you have that on your computer. If somebody hacks into your computer, copies that data off, and then essentially sells it, how would we deal with that without intellectual property?
It's trespass, I think. Kinsella would say that that's trespass. Somebody that trespasses into your domain. So I think the original copyright, even before the Statute of Anne, like the OG copyright laws were for people that had manuscripts in their like office desk, and somebody were to break in and steal those manuscripts and leave and then go publish that thing before the actual author. I think this is the same analogy for a computer. If you have a bunch of things on your computer and somebody breaks into your computer and steals it, well, that's trespass, just like somebody coming and breaking into your business and stealing something. I think that's totally
Even if they just copy it, it's the same thing.
yeah. I mean, I think that's still trespass. Yeah. Michael talked about this more. I don't like. I'm a grandpa. I don't really know how the ones and zeros. I'm not really good about the ones and zeros. But
If they pass it off as their own, it's also considered fraud, which you can hold someone civilly liable for.
yeah, the thing about fraud is like, people always say like, well, what about somebody that copies your book? Let's say Josh Suter wrote a book, and then I copy the book, and then I put my name on it, and then I sell the book. Am I defrauding Josh? And I would say, no, you're not defrauding Josh, the author. You're defrauding the person that bought the book. You're selling the book under false means. So this is what's the word I'm looking for? This is fraud. You're committing fraud against the person that bought the book. Josh doesn't need to be indemnified. I would say the person that bought the book ought to be made whole, because they bought the book under false pretenses.
I have a question as Kier.
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about copyleft and what its applications are in the current system?
Copyleft, like the commons, the Creative Commons.
Yeah.
So my understanding of the Creative Commons and like the copyleft movement, because copyright is automatic and you can't get rid of it, copyleft in the Creative Commons is like this web of licensing back and forth. Like if I agree to be a part of copyleft or a part of the Creative Commons, I'm agreeing to this vast web of licensing. Meaning, once I'm a part of this vast web of licensing, we can use each other's stuff. So it's not doing away with copyright, it's sort of getting around it by saying like, yeah, it exists and we can't get rid of copyright, but we're just gonna license the hell out of each other so that we can all do what we want with each other's stuff if we agree to be a part of this guild, essentially.
Okay. This is a question from Julia. How do you keep something secret if your workers can take the new ideas or process and go to another large business with it?
I'm signed an NDA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question from JD. This is going back to the idea of like medications and prescriptions. So in Japan, he's heard that they have like a short medication patent, and the result in the marketplace has been that the market's flooded with similar drugs with slight variations. Would a lack of patent protection cause a lot more variance from new entrants?
The lack of patent protection cause a lot more variance.
So just little things change for prescriptions.
Yeah, kind of like spice. Like if you can't have marijuana, you just like smoke spice because it's like a molecule off, or all like the research chemicals. Yeah, I mean, I guess you're saying like, could there be knockoffs? Yeah, I think if there's a market for knockoffs, you're kind of doing price discrimination for a lot more consumers in the market, right? When something new is created, let's say like large flat screen TVs, there's this period of time where only the wealthy can afford the new thing. Let's say large flat screen TVs. Over time, there becomes imitation and copying and learning so that the price of large flat screen TVs comes down over time. And now it's not just the wealthy that can afford it, it's over time, it's every single segment of the market, regardless of how much money they have, can afford this thing. So that's what innovation is: seeing something that people like, and then learning and copying and innovating off of that thing and giving and distributing it to more people. So yeah, I think the innovation comes with learning and knockoffs, and that's a good thing for most people, because when things come out, most people can't afford it. Just like, if you look at the old advertisements for desktop computers, $6,000 for this like floppy disk. Like look what you can get now. At times there's just so much innovation and copying that it like brings it to the masses. So I think that, I don't know, and I think you have to be an informed consumer to know what's what. That's on you. Caveat emptor, baby.
So this is actually a follow-up because you mentioned NDAs. Does that mean that you believe in a justice system that would uphold non-disclosure NDAs that employees would sign? How do you feel about them in general? How do you think they should be used or would be upheld?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty pro-contract. Like, if you voluntarily sign a contract, then I think there would be adjudication that would hold you to that contract. And this is another sort of like Austrian conception of a contract would be, the contract is always stating like, I hereby declare that I'm going to do this, and if I don't do this, this might happen. So what the contract isn't what's written on the paper. The contract is the understanding. So then the question is, well, why does somebody write it down on paper? Well, when you write it down on paper and you have people sign, that's an explicit understanding of the agreement. So a contract, in legal terms, is simply an agreement. The paper and the writing and the signatures are a visible recognition to third parties that we both understand what we're doing. So if you don't think that the NDA that you're signing at the job that you have is good, and you're like scared and you don't want to do it, then I would say don't sign it. That is a potentially profit-harming mechanism, profit-harming decision by the company to create an NDA so subversive and so terrible that no one wants to sign it. Like that would be kind of bad business practice. So it's in the interest of business to create one that people will sign. So if you enter into this contract, I think it could go to adjudication if you break it.
Okay, so I have one from Andy. The question is, are jokes rivalrous? You can really only tell a joke to a person once before it loses value. Is it rivalrous in a way that a book or movie or other media isn't?
So there's the difference between type and I forget the legalese, but so there's a joke is non-rivalrous, right? So you can see comedians that perform on the road, they've already come up with a way to, there's a cost of exclusion with their sets and their jokes. So what do they do when you watch a comedian who's performing on the road? They take your cell phone. And they take your cell phone and they put it in a bag and they lock it up and they don't give it to you until after. So that's one way comedians have dealt with the fact that jokes are non-rivalrous. But a book or a joke book, the jokes in the book are the type, and that is non-rivalrous. So the words in order, that's non-rivalrous. But the book itself is rivalrous, so we can't both own the book at the same time. So I would say a property right in the book is legitimate and should be upheld and is justified, but there is no copyright in the order of the words of the joke. And that's why comedians take your cell phone.
Okay, I think this is our last question, and it's from me.
Oh.
So I happen to know that you are a big fan of music.
Yeah.
And I want you for a moment to envision a world in which intellectual property does not exist and is not monopoly enforced by government. How would you, as an entrepreneur, suggest to musicians to monetize their music?
Yeah, it's totally changed. I mean, I remember being in 2000, being in my George Mason dorm room, rocking Napster all day, every day, just getting a bunch of music. I think the MP3, the proliferation of the MP3 kind of changed music, whether people liked it or not. Today, I would say my understanding of the music industry is that people make their money selling merchandise and touring. So that seems to be the reaction to the proliferation of music. So it seems like today's market is you create music, you record music, and releasing your music for basically free. You get some money from streaming services, but your music is sort of a loss leader to then attract the money down the road. So that's what it seems to be. A new up and coming artist. I remember being in a college band, and we just like gave music away to everybody that would take it. You know, we want to get our name out there. We want to get the music out there. So I think that's kind of how it works today, where if you view your recorded music as a loss leader to then eventually get fans who want to come see you, who want to buy your merch, maybe you can get picked up in such and such, you get on tour with a bigger band, maybe you can sell derivatives of your works somehow, then that seems to be the way to go. It seems like the recorded song, once the MP3 came around, is sort of like a loss leader. So I would say like use your loss leader wisely, because that's a legitimate business tool. Yeah, top sales funnel. Yeah.
All right. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would say check out, again, the utilitarian case, where there's literally nothing in the world that says that it helps innovation, and then Kinsella's against intellectual property, where it's sort of the moral case. And I would say if you're confused about intellectual property from a theoretical framework, then you probably are confused about where property rights come from. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We love you. We miss you. Hopefully we'll be back soon. So a couple quick things. I believe both the books that Justin mentioned are free online. And I'm going to see if I can find them, and I'll post them in the Telegram group later. For everyone who's not in our Telegram group, we have a Telegram group. Join it. It's super fun. We talk about all sorts of stuff. We will post a link to that in the notes for this YouTube. While everyone's staying safe and ordering from home, please use Liberty on the Rocks as your Amazon Smile so you can support us with all your orders at home. And otherwise, stay safe. Don't get the corona. Hopefully, we'll see you soon. We're hoping to do more virtual events, but the world's changing really fast right now, and we don't know. We don't want to plan anything because we have no idea what's going to happen. So we love you guys. Fuck the state. Have a good night.